Welcome to the Pivot Experience podcast, where leadership transformation isn't just a concept, it's a journey we take together. This is where real leaders share real stories about the moments that changed everything. In each episode, we dive deep into the pivotal experiences that transformed good leaders into great ones. Whether you're a seasoned executive, a rising star in your organization, or someone ready to take that next big step in your leadership journey, you're in the right place. Get ready to learn, grow, and maybe even find that spark that ignites your own leadership pivot. This is the Pivot Experience podcast, where your next breakthrough starts here.
Hey guys, what's up? It's your friend, Pastor John R. Adolph from the Antioch Church in Beaumont, Texas. Hey, listen, do me a favor, like, share, and subscribe this channel so you can continue to pivot into your next.
What's up and what's happening, TPE family? We're back with another episode of the Pivot Experience podcast, where our aim and goal is to help leaders pivot into their next. My name is Alex Seale, and I've had the joy and the honor of working for one of the world's most caring brands for the last 22 years. As you guys know, this podcast has been developed to help leaders get better, help leaders through the stories and experiences of others to help them get to the next level in their career and in their journey. On today's episode is no different. We have somebody very special here. I've been hearing about this individual for the longest. There's a young lady that's on the TPE team by the name of Giovanna Roach, and she talks about him often. Actually, I think she sent me some clips from his podcast a few times in reference to some of the things that we were talking about or some of the things that we're going through in the restaurant. And ever since I had a chance to meet this guy in person, I was just blown away by his leadership acumen, his skills, everything that he just brings to the table. As some of you may know, I have the privilege to be able to be a part of a group called the CFA Collaborate, and we put together programs quarterly that are relevant to the restaurant. And on this last Collaborate, we had Giovanna brought to the table this gentleman to come and facilitate a session on communication. And I tell you what, everybody in the room definitely walked away much better than they did when they entered the room. And so on today's show, we have none other than Justin Dubose on the line with us today. Justin, how are you doing?
Hey, good, Alex. I appreciate those kind words, and thank you for having me, man. It means a lot.
Oh, for sure, man. I never take for granted, when somebody carves out some time out of their schedule to come join us and to speak into our audience here at TPE. And so I'm very grateful for you to just give us that look and give us that time to be able to pour into the leaders who tune into this. And so, but before I continue on, I want you just to introduce yourself to the audience, who you are, what you're about, and kind of what you're into.
Yeah, sure. Thanks again for the opportunity. So yeah, my name's Justin, like Alex said. I'll try to give you the short version of my story, but basically most of my background is in local church ministry and in the military. So I've been pastoring in some form or another in local church for the last 20 years. I've been in the Army Reserves as a chaplain for 15 years. And then you mentioned Giovanna. So Giovanna, about 4 years ago, kind of started bringing me into the Chick-fil-A world. And I didn't realize just how into it you would get, once you got in, that how deep the waters were. But yeah, man. So one of my back up a little bit. So I'm in Baytown, not too far from you. And one of my previous church assignments, I was running a private school, and I was just having all kind of trouble. And so I ended up enrolling and getting a Ph.D. in organizational leadership because I thought somebody has to know how to make people get along and work together and achieve more than they are, accomplishing right now. And that was really helpful. And then Giovanna brought me into Chick-fil-A. So, I started a company, nonprofit actually, called Communicate to Care. And I was working with Chick-fil-A's and with churches and with other organizations. And then last year, I started working with a group, leadership consultancy. And basically my Chick-fil-A work, I started working through them. Really wonderful group, and very happy to be there, be a part of what they're doing. But yeah, still have these other kind of, still pastor and still got the Army, married for 20 years, 5 kids. So, I just am too busy, Alex.
you spent a lot of time on your career affairs and kind of breezed over that wife with 5 kids. I would assume that's probably absorbing the bulk of your time. I've got 3 in my head spinning some days, and so God bless you, to say the least. In regards to that, man. But no, nice to have met you, Justin. I'm hoping that we continue a long relationship, in passing, or just bouncing things off of each other if the opportunity presents itself, man. And so we're so glad to have you. And so we're just going to jump into the conversation. And I've had a couple of people who have had military experience on the show before, I believe. And I respect what you guys do in the military. So let me just say thank you for your service, and thank you for the things you've contributed in that area. And when you talk about leadership, there's no other organization that is synonymous to leadership than the military. A very structured a way of going about promoting people. From what I can tell, now I've never been in the military, so you'll know a little bit behind the scenes. And so when you talk about leadership and you're talking about, just the tasks you guys have, I would imagine that you have a lot of experience to share there, but you also worked in ministry, and you've also worked in these business sectors. And just from your experience in those 3 buckets and your family, in the family component, what is one universal truth that you think exists across all mediums when you think about it?
Yeah. So that's a hard question, because you're taking all of the sum of what's true about leadership and going like, what's the one? So I'll give you one, and I'll steal a phrase. Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. So everything is stolen from somebody. So I'll steal a phrase, and I'll tell you where I got it from. So about 5 years ago, on the Army side of my life, I was really blessed and fortunate to get into the special operations community. Which is just a really special and unique community of just, hard charging, really smart, really, just the very best of the best, I think. And when I came in, I wanted to get to know, this community, these people. What do they value? Who are they? And so they have a really neat school that you're able to go to if you're in that community. The acronym is JSAL, but it's Joint Special Operations University. And so I signed up. I took a course. It's down in Tampa. Basically like intro to the community. And so they have 5. The first thing you learn is 5, they call them soft truths. So SOF is an acronym for Special Operations Forces. And it's kind of like their core values, or their 10 commandments of the community. And the very first one, I was like, man, this is great. I really like it. So I'm going to steal their verbiage and give it to you, and then explain it just a little bit. But the first soft truth is that humans are more important than hardware. So they have 5, but that one is kind of, everything is built on that humans are more important than hardware. And basically the idea is that the most important thing that you can do within your organization, whatever it is, like you said, across all sectors, business or, ministry, military, family, whatever, is that it's the people that you have that are the most important thing. If you want to succeed, or you want to grow, or you want to accomplish, more, it's all about the humans. So there's a tendency, I think, to think, well, if we just had the right strategy, or the right technology, or the right location, or the right fill in the blank, that's really what we need to kind of put us over the edge. But I've found true, and you probably have too, Alex, that humans are really the most important ingredient. It's like if you've got the right people, you're going to do more than a really well-funded group, but that just has a bad team. And so, a really great team of the right people are going to do more than anything else. And so I guess what I would say is the one universal truth, as hard as that is to answer, is that phrase, humans are more important than hardware. Is get you the right people, invest in them, pour into them, help them grow. And that's going to lead you to success much better, and I think much faster too, than anything else.
No, I love that. And I think that when we really think about what you just said, and we really lean into this idea of humans are more important than hardware, think about the computer that you bought in 2010 and try to upgrade it to today's software, or to today's latest and greatest. And I think that, I talk to, and I think very similarly about something that at work, at Chick-fil-A, I tell people, it's like, I can get a sandwich out of the machine, make it perfectly, and sit it in front of me, and it's going to be only as good as it's at its peak. It's reached its highest form of potential when we make it correctly. But a person, though, that potential and that peak is almost virtually limitless, depending on how well we approach them, how well we invest in them, and how well we pour into them. And so, what I hear you saying, that is almost synonymous to that. I've got some older tech in here that I just have it from a novelty standpoint, but there's no way that I can put it through anything that I do today. And so, as hardware fades, the functionality and utility of those things fade, but the power of harnessing human capital never goes away. And so, I love that analogy that you bring to the table, because I can't agree more. People are the most important thing. True Kathy says that we're not in the chicken business, but we're in the people business. And so, I think what you're saying affirms that. And I love how when you go from organization to organization, they have their special way of saying it, but we all come back to, as you said, there's nothing new under the sun. It's just repackaged and rephrased. But at the end of the day, people are the most important thing. And speaking of people, and so this is a challenge, I think, that most of the people who listen to this, that if they're in a GM role or ownership role, something that they may struggle with, and I would love to get your opinion on this. You mentioned ministry, so in some capacity, you're dealing with people on the deepest human level, the most vulnerable human level, and you're really getting a peek into who they are, or who they think they are, or what they want to do. And a lot of times, I notice people get caught up on their passions or their callings having to specifically align up with what they do in their employment. Mm-hmm. Whereas I kind of have a different view on that. I think you can walk in your calling no matter where you are, no matter where you are positioned. But I just want your opinion on, how do you balance, or how do you identify the intersection of someone's sacred calling and then their organizational impact?
Yeah, no, that's a huge question, and you're exactly right. I think I've had the same experience you have, and so let me first define that term, sacred calling, because I use that calling. I mean, I use that terminology, and again, it's stolen. I stole it from somebody else, so I'll cite him. I got a friend named Aaron Four, who's a pastor in Austin, Texas, and he used that language to me, and I thought, man, I really like it. So anyway, the idea of sacred calling is that each person is uniquely created, and they've got something that God has given them that only they can accomplish. It's very unique to them. Which is what makes it sacred, and it's something they'll do no matter what organization they're in. So the idea of sacred calling is, whether you're at Chick-fil-A, Alex, or whether you're even at a different Chick-fil-A or a different organization, wherever you go. You have this sacred calling on your life that God's uniquely equipped you and given you these gifts to really bless the world. So as far as the intersectionality of that, people's sacred calling and their organizational impact, what I've found is typically, you're exactly right. People look at where they are within an organization at a given point in time, and that thing becomes their whole identity. Like there's no concept of, who I am outside of this role. So in a Chick-fil-A world, if somebody's a director, then their whole view of themselves becomes tied into, that role. And, which can be great because you're all in, but it also can really conflate things where, they start seeing themselves as Justin the director, when in fact, the gifts that God has given you are so much bigger than that. So what I tell people is, oftentimes I think we try to answer the second question first and the first question second. So the first question, which is I think the most important, is like, who am I and why am I here? Not like, why am I here at Chick-fil-A, but like, why am I here on planet Earth right now at this point in time? Of all the time that, God could have put me here, why did he put me here right now? What does he want me to do with my life? And that's, of course, like a much bigger, much deeper existential question than, how do I thrive in my role as your director, Alex? So, but it's because it's a harder question. I think people try to answer the second one first, which is, how do I make a difference in this role that I'm in? But really, if people can, answer that first question of who am I at my core? What is my sacred calling? Why am I here? And then whatever role they're in, it's going to make them more effective as the director at your store, or the executive, over here in Baytown, or whatever they're doing. I'll give you an example. I have a friend he's an operator up in Wisconsin, and he and I were having this conversation. And he said, you know, I'm an operator of this store, but that's not really who I am. It's an avenue that God has given me. It's a wonderful avenue, but it's an avenue that He's given me to impact the world and to change people's lives. So he sees it as he's operating, his restaurant as a way not only to bless and benefit his team members, but he also does, some work over in Africa and stuff like that. So he sees it as, his sacred calling is to impact lives, and that God has given him this position as this operator of this Chick-fil-A as the vehicle to do that. So as far as helping leaders identify that, I think the best way is to try to get them to unpack the who am I and why am I here? Because you probably could vouch for this, Alex. Most people don't think about that because it's a really, really hard question. And so to do your homework there requires so much work, and you got to dig really deep. And so, like in my coaching relationships or in my pastoral relationships or whatever, those are the questions that I really try to help people answer, because I'm going, look, if you'll meditate on that and think about that, you're going to be so much more impactful in your role at Chick-fil-A or in your job in the Army or whatever you've got. Because, if you try to answer the second question first, you're just going to end up with imposter syndrome, where you're just trying to act like what you think a director is, or what you think an executive is, or what you think an officer is, or whatever. So to avoid that imposter syndrome, let's dig a little deeper and go, okay, what is my sacred calling? Why am I here? And a lot of times just thinking about that question, even if you don't arrive at the answer, you have an impact in the organization where you are.
No, I love that. And, I guess just to add to your answer, along with a coaching relationship, I do believe that there's assessments out there that you can take that will help you get started on the journey of discovering who you are. Whether that's there's a DISC assessment, there's a working genius assessment that's really popular right now. There's a lot of different things that you can do to help push yourself in the area of discovery of who you are and what you're about. And it will really, be enlightening. I took the working genius assessment maybe a year ago. And honestly, I guess, being in a leadership position for as long as I have, it verified and validated some things that I already thought about myself. So if you're listening to this and you are newer on your leadership journey and you're just getting started, it might help you realize those things. And for some of those seasoned individuals, it could just confirm and affirm what you already thought about yourself and what you already thought about the job that you were doing. No, that's excellent, man. And so I would imagine in your travels and in your relationships from a coaching and pastoral standpoint, you've ran into some people or some leaders that are high capacity. They come to the table. They're like a raging bull in the china cabinet sometimes, and they might think that they have it all figured out. They might, and I'll be transparent with you a little bit. Just in my own journey, I found myself a few years ago. We listen to these podcasts and we read these books, and sometimes it can start overlapping and running into each other, and then you're trying to push yourself to absorb all this information. And I paused and said, well, let me pause on this and try to implement some of these things and get some traction around these things. And then I found myself just stop pouring into myself from a self leadership development standpoint. How do you create moments of what's the term I want to use? Those aha moments for those high capacity leaders to help them reach new levels of success, even though they may feel like they've already done what they needed to do?
Sure. No, great question. And just to echo what you said about the assessments, 100% true. And that's part of my answer for this one is, so like if I'm consulting with a potential client at, leadership consultancy, I'll have an assessment. I'll go, look, first thing, let's sit down and take the assessment together. Because just like you, when I took one, I took the CoreStrengths was the one that really just kind of was my aha moment. It helped me realize why I am the way that I am, and why I function the way that I do, and it a lot of it. So anyway, that's a good starting point, I think, is those assessments. But more specifically, as far as an approach to helping leaders kind of break through whatever ceiling they're at to reach new levels of impact, there's a quote by I love Zig Ziglar. I don't know how many of your listeners will be familiar with Zig Ziglar, but man, I love that guy. And he had a quote that I use all the time, and it was that questions are the answers. Questions are the answers. And so many times I think, when you're just working and working, just like the scenario you mentioned about yourself, you're in the trenches and you're implementing and you're trying and whatever. A lot of times you can't see the forest through the trees. And so the answers that you're finding are to problems that fit where you are now, which is probably part of why you've hit the ceiling, that you have. And so really what I found that's really helpful when you get a high capacity leader is just ask them the right questions. Okay, so what do you see? What do you think is your biggest problem? And just those kind of questions. And a lot of times I've found that people will verbally process out, and they'll give you little nuggets to go, okay, see, you know what the answer is. You just need the right question. And then once that little bit of nugget gets out, well, then it gives you something you can say, okay, I think you're on the right track, but let's just figure out how to do it to help you, overcome that. Because again, you're in the thick of it. There's a military term, the fog of war, and it's really hard to see because, you're dealing with the day in and day out, the tyranny of the urgent kind of thing. So helping them go, listen, you're at like an organizational level of leadership, and I think you might have topped out, and maybe it's time to bump you up to like a more strategic level of leadership where you have a bigger picture of what's going on. But what do we need to do to get you to make that leap? What do other people need to take care of? What can be delegated or kinds of things? So most of the time, especially in a Chick-fil-A context, I've found that people really, really know their stuff. They're really good. A lot of times they're just kind of overwhelmed, and it's the fog of war and it's the forest of trees, and somebody just to come in and ask questions that help kind of unlock things that are already in there. And then it almost takes you up an elevation a little bit, and you can see it a little better, and you go, okay, now I think you know what to do, but let's just help, fly this plane together.
I think you're hitting a nail on the head as to why leaders and organizations should pursue coaching relationships. It's one of the tough things that I had to realize is that, no matter your level of experience or no matter your level of expertise, having somebody come in with a fresh perspective, a third party view, an objective view on what you're doing, how you're going about doing it, it plays such a big role in that discovery that you were mentioning. And like, I just, for myself, in deploying some of the core coaching tactics that you learn through, getting your certifications and things like that, it's just like, when you start asking the right questions, sometimes, I'll be transparent, early on in some of my coaching relationships, you want to come in and dictate the entire session, and you want to impress upon them what you want them to learn versus what they
have to know that your stuff.
Yeah, and so I've come to realize, man, some of the most effective sessions I've had is when I've just sat back and just asked the right questions and steering them to this place of discovery and going, okay, I kind of felt like that was it, but thank you for helping giving me these clarifying questions and clarifying thoughts to be able to get to this realization. So, man, I think you're super spot on when you talk about the question is the answer. I love that. Zig Ziglar, there's one quote in particular that I always use from him, but which I don't know if he stole it or I'm sure other folks have stole it, but it's, you help more people get what they want. In turn, they will help you get what you want. So that's one of my Zig Ziglar mainstays. And so I love that you brought him into the conversation. In your experience, across the military, across the leadership consultancy, across all these different facets, what is one of the most overlooked leadership development aspects that you think has the biggest impact long term?
Yeah, so great question. And one thing you mentioned was long-term success. And one part of that that's easy to overlook in the wording of the question itself is long-term. Like to have long-term success, you got to make it long-term. And so some of that, I think, just to make it long-term before you even get to success is reminding, leaders, hey, listen, this is a marathon. This is a marathon. So, if we're going to make it, hey, we can't burn all of our fuel before we even get out of orbit. We got to go to the moon, man. The goal isn't just to get off the launch pad. We got to get to the moon. But as far as long-term success, And I'm going to give you an answer that may sound a little weird, but I'll try to explain as best I can. I think it's helping people. This is leadership development, helping people discover, and it's similar to what we talked about before. What are you passionate about? Like, what do you really care about? And what is it that really, really brings you joy? Because if somebody tries to approach leadership development from like a classroom, kind of an approach where they just get all the tools that they need and they go, okay, to do this job, here's the tools that you need. And then they take off. Well, they could be, and I've seen this, and you probably have too, Alex, because you've been in the game long enough, that people can do something for a long time, but they just burn out because they don't really care about it. They don't really care about the people, and they don't really care about the organization, and they don't really care about the mission. And so they can, in theory, be the best equipped leader to have everything they need to lead well, but they just don't make it, or they don't have the success because their heart isn't in it. And so, as far as what's a really overlooked aspect of leadership development, I think it's just asking those questions of, what do you really care about? What really brings you joy? I had an example. So when I was leading that private school, I remember vividly, I was in a board meeting, and it was tense, and we were fighting, and we were arguing about just trivial things. And I remember pausing, and I said, just real quick, does anybody even want to be here? Do any of us around here want to be a part of this group or this organization? And it kind of was a showstopper, at least for a little bit, because it was like, you know what? We don't. No wonder we're fighting. We don't even want to be here right now. Like, none of us care about this the way that people should in these seats. So really overlooked, I think, is just, what do you care about? What are you passionate about? What really brings you joy? Because when you find that, you'll find long-term success. And it may not look like how you would have defined long-term success 5, 10, 15 years ago, but you'll accomplish it in a way that, you just are full of joy, and the people that are with you are thriving more than they ever would if you just got all the right tools to be a great leader.
No, that's powerful. That's really, really good. All bringing it back to purpose. When you're out there working without purpose. I don't know if you've seen the movie Soul. It's a cartoon Disney movie, and the guy basically, he's a musician and he's passionate about being music, and he gets his first big break, and it's a Disney movie. Gets his first big break, and then before the performance, he falls into a sewer and he dies, right? And he's going to their version of what I guess heaven would be, and he's trying to do all he can because he has to get back to earth to do his thing. And there's these people, there's one space when you're in your zone, that's your place when you're doing your most valuable work. And then there's the place where it was like the desert almost, where these guys were hedge fund managers. They had these really important jobs, but they were drowning in the work and they were burnt out from the work, And so it's like it's easy to find yourself on one of those sides, whether you're operating in a place where you feel fulfilled and you feel impassioned about what you do, or you've acquired so much responsibility through something that you thought you liked, and you're in this cycle of burnout, this crazy cycle where you can't stop the work, but you're here. And so I love that you continue to bring us back to what's your purpose, what's your passion, what are you here for. Now, I want to shift gears just a little bit into something that I think a lot of leaders, particularly the people who maybe tune into this podcast, it's something that they may struggle with. And I know for certain, I watch some of our leaders struggle with this as well. It's the balance between quick decision making and thoughtful long-term strategic planning. Sometimes the strategic plan conflicts with quick decisions, and leaders are in an impasse of, what do they do? And so how do you help leaders identify and balance that tension?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think you're right. As far as where the rubber meets the road, that is one of the big, just everyday struggles that leaders, especially emerging and developing leaders, face as they're growing. So short answer to that question, Alex, is I think that it's a big part of it is just helping them develop other leaders to progressively make more of those quick decisions. And even in front of that, upstream of that, I think is helping them recognize the need to develop other leaders. Because, as you progress up to different levels of leadership or different levels of responsibility, your voice is needed in different places. So, when you're at a real direct, like a shift lead level within Chick-fil-A, your voice is really going to be needed in a lot of those kind of quick decision making opportunities where the team members you're leading may genuinely not know, and so it's like, well, hey, I need to look over here. I need to, speak into this over there. But then as you go from, for example, shift lead to director, you have to have other people who can make those quick decisions. And so a lot of times it's helping, I think, leaders identify where they are within the organization and going, okay, but where is your voice really needed? And where is your voice maybe not needed? Because you might still be involved in some like micro, quick decisions to be made that your voice isn't needed for that. It might have been, before, but other people could make those quick decisions. So what you need to do is to take a step back and help other people have the confidence and the competency to make those kinds of decisions so that, you can step back and make more of those strategic decisions. And even some of that, I think, is in helping people identify the difference in a strategic decision and a quick decision, because, you probably have team members, and certainly in all the years you've done it, you've been a part of these kinds of conversations where it's like, you're making this thing out to be really, really important, but it's really not. Like your voice isn't needed there. Where I really need your voice is over here in these kind of conversations. And so some of it, I think, is really just helping them see where is your voice needed, because the higher up you get in leadership, echelons where you have more of a big picture overview. If your voice isn't in, or your focus isn't on the strategic planning, then there is no strategic planning happening. So the quick decisions are going to happen by default, because in like a quick service restaurant, they have to be made. And so somebody's going to be making those. But the strategic planning doesn't necessarily have to be done. You don't really feel, the weight of that like you do the quick decisions, but somebody has to do it. And so if you're in that role, it's like, look, for your good and everybody else's good, you have to focus more on the thoughtful strategic planning and figure out how to disengage and delegate on a lot of this quick decision making, because your voice just isn't needed there, but it really is needed on this thoughtful strategic planning, and it carries really severe consequences if you don't focus on that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's just how I wrestle with the tension of a lot of that with a lot of leaders that I work with and coach.
That was a very unique way of answering that question. I didn't expect you to answer it that way. However, I love the fact of like, hey, let's not deal with trying to create duality in the individual. Let's make sure that the individual is answering the right questions, like or tasked to make the right decisions. No, I mean, that helps me. I mean, hey, this whole podcast is an effort to help other folks pivot into their next, but that perspective is different for me, because I try to, initially, or at least up until this point, I was, as the people say, I was today years old whenever I figured something out. But as I try to work with individuals and give them the perspective of trying to get them to think with that duplicity, but like they don't need to. Hey, focus on the decisions you need to make, and and at one point you said something to the effect of like, maybe you shouldn't be making these decisions, and I know that could be blunt, that depending on how that's communicated, but that's the truth. There's some things that you may or may not need to be engaged in or involved in terms of the decision. And if you focus the bulk of your time on the decisions that you're best equipped to handle, or that fits within your job description, some of that tension might go away. So I love that. No, you answered that very well. Like I
appreciate that.
I have been glued the entire time. But I'm just saying, though, that one, I was like, oh, okay, that's a different way of approaching that, or a different way of thinking about that for sure. Now, when you are thinking about identifying talent, I think most leaders have a really, really good knack for seeing the potential in an upcoming leader or emerging star on their teams. Like, they work hard, they're punctual, they have some of the intangibles you can't teach people. They bring a lot of good things to the table in the organization, and our need, and we immediately want to jump on getting them through our pipeline to help them develop. And I think sometimes once they cross the threshold into leadership, transitioning them from someone who had high potential into somebody who was a high performer, that's where the gear gets stuck sometimes. And so what are some of the frameworks or some of the things that you do to help other companies transform high potential team members into high performing leaders?
Yeah, really, really great question. And I'll say too that I think you have to understand, first of all, that, failure is just a part of that game, right? Like, you're going to put people in a pipeline that aren't ready, and it's not going to work out. And that's just part of it, and you're going to put people in there that you're just confident that, they're ready, and they're not. And you're probably going to not put people in there because you think, well, they need more development, but they really are ready. They just, didn't have the opportunity to showcase it or something. So one is, I think, recognizing that there's a failure rate is built into that equation. But as far as a framework, I ran into this problem just like you have in the organizations I serve with and people that I coach. And so I actually sat down and I was trying to literally make out a framework. So I'll give you the Cliff Notes version of it, but I wrote an article and it's on medium.com. So if anyone wants to do a search for my name, Justin Dubose, Medium, there's only 2 articles, but this is one. But in the military with the guys and the gals that I was leading, that's a big part of it, is kind of identifying talent, so to speak, because you may be rating 50 people and and the military rating system forces you to number them. This is number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3. And it can be really, really hard and challenging to figure out, well, who really is number 1 or number 2? And how do I know I'm not just being biased about this? So I basically developed this framework, and the short version of it, Alex, is if you give people time to prove themselves, either by their successes or their failures, and then kind of look at their body of work, even if it's just over, say, a couple weeks or a month, and ask a few questions. Again, questions being the answers, is 3 categories. Is if they're with their successes and failures, are they situational? Are they skill-based? Or is it more systemic? And so a lot of times you'll have these, anybody can be put in a tough situation and not shine because they're just put in an impossible situation. And so I think a lot of times we can look at someone's failure and it's really maybe the result of just being in a tough spot. And so I encourage people, I'm like, if you really believe that their success or their failure has to do with one particular situation that they're in, don't read too much into it, because you try them in different situations, give them time to be in a different situation, just maybe have some on-the-spot correction. And if it's skill-based, back to those assessments that you were talking about, is they may just be in this kind of area where they're mismatched, and maybe they're, a really high performer, but they're in a role that is, not really a high-performing role. And so they seem as though they're failing or they're underperforming, when in reality, it could just be a mismatch of their skills. And if you, try them in a different role, man, they might just thrive and they might blow it out of the water. So for those situations, I encourage people, hey, take those assessments, take a CoreStrengths or a Working Genius or an Enneagram or a DISC or any of those kinds of things, and just kind of look at, well, are they really a good fit for the role I have them in? Because maybe they just need, a different role. And with that, if they are failing, it's like, don't assume that it's because of their attitude or their work ethic or something else. It could just be that their skills aren't matched to what they're doing. I've been in that role a lot of times where people's expectations of me because of the role I'm in, they don't match who I am. And so I find myself disappointing people until I kind of can, find a different role that's a better suit. And then the last category was systemic. Sometimes, like our whole systems are broken. And when I was running that private school, that's the way that was. It was like, man, we just need a new system, like it's not the people. The people are getting ground up by the system itself. And so, if you look at your output and your products or your people or your service, and it's just, it's just generally bad, then it may not be that person. It may be that, you need to really evaluate some systemic level changes. And so some people, I think, assume that people are always the problem. And if that's, one person that's over a particular part of the restaurant or something, they can assume that, they're the problem. But really, you may need to kind of critically look at the systems that you've given them to work with, because, anybody that's dealt a bad hand is not going to win very many rounds, So anyway, that's kind of the short version of the framework that I'll coach people through, is like, just let people succeed or fail, give them an opportunity to really show themselves, but also don't just assume that all the results are tied to them. It could be your systems, could be just a mismatch form, or it could be just that they're in a really, really difficult situation.
No, I love that. No, there's one thing that I want to kind of highlight on that you spoke to, just having the right person on the right seat of the bus. Sometimes we're trying to force that round peg into that square hole, and it's not fitting. You might have someone who's excellent and that is really good at something, but they're just in the wrong spot in your organization. Sometimes you need to shift, and sometimes you need to just do something different that will give that individual the opportunity to really thrive and flourish. And if you're not open enough, sometimes us as leaders, we can find ourselves being very close-minded. And I've been there. I want to see a particular thing work. I want to see a particular thing happen with with the individual, and I've got this idea about who they could be and what they can do, and then I'm just imposing my thoughts on them, and it's not really lined up with their best area. So I love that. I'm going to skip to this question, and because I think it's a cool one, and I think I think I got a hunch on how you're going to answer it, but you've just been surprising me today, so I might, you never know. But how do you see the integration of personal values and organizational leadership evolving over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, of all the questions you sent me, Alex, that was one where I was like, "Oh man, this one is tough, man. This is a hard one to answer, because you're asking me to put on my prophet hat and look into the future, So, I'll give you an answer that I think maybe not what you expect, but we'll see. So, part of what I do is I teach. I'm an adjunct professor at Abilene Christian University, so I developed some courses for them, and I'm teaching. And this is it's a roundabout way to answer, but I promise I'm getting there. And one of the things in education, for example, we're also seeing it in the Army. I don't know if there's opportunities to see it in Chick-fil-A or not, but is that AI, like what people. So the purpose of going through a process is to help you grow and develop, and to shape you into the kind of person and leader that the organization needs you to be, right? To grow the brand or whatever the thing is. But we're wrestling with this AI stuff, and everyone wants quick answers. So you can craft this great process, this leadership development process, and put people through, and they just want the answers. They're like, okay, just give me the answer so that I can move on to the next thing, right? It's like an app on your iPhone. There, okay, you reached the end now. Now you got to pay this, and you can move to the next level. So you just pay it, move to the next level. So it really can short circuit, and I'm trying to look into even more in the future, like you asked, but it can really short circuit like that deep probing of, what are your personal values? Like, what do I really value as a person that I bring to an organization? And that if I'm in a leadership role, this is going to be what shapes even how I, influence the organization. People have to see the value in that. So I think probably one of the hardest things is going to be getting people to see the benefit and the value in identifying their personal values. And then once they identify those, which I think takes a lot of work, as far as integrating them into organizational leadership, I think the hard part is helping them see, like, you have the ability. In fact, it's impossible not to do this. It's impossible to be in a role and not shape it because of who you are. And so if people haven't thought about that, then they're going to step in, and again, it's going to be that imposter syndrome. So I think the biggest challenge in the next 5 to 10 years is, as AI increases and as, people that are younger continue to matriculate into the workforce, they're going to have to they're going to have that kind of AI sort of mentality or fluency. And it's going to take some old heads like you and me, Alex, to sit down with them and go, hey, I need to know who you are, and you need to know who you are, because before I put you in this role that has a lot of consequences attached to it with this leadership role, I need to know who you are, because I'm going to entrust this whole part of our organization to you. So who are you? Like, what do you value? How is that going to work itself out in your leadership role with your team members?
No, you're stepping into some territory that I've been having some like personal reflection on. Particularly when you start talking about AI, and one of the fears that I have with AI, even though it's a remarkable tool when used well, it does close the gaps in time on a lot of different things. On a personal level, I say, a lot of the things that I ask AI to do, I say it's not things that I can't do. It's just shortening the time on things
Sure.
shortening the time. But I think on the flip side of that, to the individual, to your point, who's entering the workforce, they're going to lose the opportunity to discover how to do certain things, because they're relying on the machine to even that thing simple as writing the email. I think there's certain soft skills and certain just communication skills that could have the opportunity to be lost because we're allowing the machine to do it all for you. Like I said, it's if I get AI to write an email template, it has I can use all those words and all that sentence structure. It just did it faster. You know what I mean?
Right.
Versus, and so I do think that's a challenge. And but the flip side of that is, I was talking to my dad about this, and he said this, and I had stopped me in my tracks. He said, I bet farmers felt the same way when some of these machines and things came along. So I think it's a part of the trajectory, but I 100% agree. We have to be aware of its use. We have to be aware of, hey, you could have got somebody who got AI to write their resume for them and write, all these gleaming things about them. But then when they sit in front of you, you're not getting the same, the same that you thought. So I think it's important to note that. So no, so good. And so this is going to be I'd say this is going to be the last question. I think
Okay.
you've canvassed the board, man, very well. Again, thank you guys so much. And for those of you who are listening out there, I kind of forgot that we have an audience, and because I've been sucking all of this in. I've been taking all of this in as a learning and teaching for me. Selfishly, I mentioned about my career and said I kind of took a step back from some of the development things, and doing this podcast has been more self-development than I thought it would be in having these conversations. But based on your leadership experience across all these sectors, man, and based on all the things that you've had to do, had a chance to do, and all the people you've had an opportunity to impact, what are some of the most critical skills you believe that leaders need to develop for 2025 and beyond?
So I'll give you one. I'll give you one skill, but before I give it to you, I'm going to give you the areas where this skill, like in working with people and in coaching, the areas where I'm seeing this skill come out, right? And these are things that come up. I'm sure you encounter them in the restaurant as well as in coaching. People struggle with accountability. How do I hold people accountable? They struggle with working together, some conflict resolution, or helping team members succeed. Just like the question you asked about, how do you really develop leaders and help them thrive? They help grow a business or grow a person. They help cast a vision for what you want this organization to be. They help for all this, and I would say it's the same thing that I talked with you guys about at the Houston Collab. It's communication. I think if I had to identify one singular skill that people need to develop for 2025 and beyond, and I left out certain things that I don't know if they're skills, like humility. I think humility is probably like, what everyone needs to really succeed, but how to communicate, because, and again, I may be sounding like the get off my lawn guy, dad, that kind of thing. But I do think people have lost the ability, or they are losing, if they're not careful and they're not intentional about it, the ability to communicate well, where I can sit down face to face with you, Alex, and I can really just talk with you, and I can listen well. And it's listening, and it's not just talking, but sit down and just let people know, listen, I appreciate you. I understand what you're saying. And now I'm going to tell you what I need from you, because in those conversations from leader to team member, I tell people all the time, clarity is kindness. Like, I want to set you up for success. So let me be as clear as I can with what I need you to do and what I expect. And so I think 2025 and beyond, if leaders can really develop their communication skills, their ability to understand people, their ability to listen, even if they don't feel, like they're an excellent talker, be a great listener, and that's really gonna help them. So, in all those areas that I mentioned and so many others, the ability to listen, the ability to communicate people are gonna be able to just go so much farther than they are right now, or than even they think they can, if that's the only skill that they really work on and develop and become comfortable and fluent at.
No, I love that. There's a phrase we use in the business. Communication is the oxygen to execution. And so everything that you just said fully supports the need for communication. We believe that our ability to execute at a high level is predicated on how well we communicate, how often we communicate. And so I love that you use that as your singular skill. Guys, you heard it first here from Justin, okay? If you work on communication, a lot of things will start to work in your favor, because you start to realize that, hey, if you start working on it, you'll start to see certain things move in your life in a direction that you would like to have it go in. But Justin, man, I want to say thank you so much for carving out. We're coming up close to an hour. I don't think we're going to quite get an hour in, but I really appreciate you taking some time away from your family. As we've already discussed, there's some people maybe banging on the door waiting on you to get done. But no, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I wish you well in everything that you put your hand to in 2025. Thankful for meeting you in person and creating this relationship. And before we get out of here, one, do you have any closing words? And two, where can people connect with you at?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Appreciate that opportunity to share. So, only closing words I have is I feel exactly the same way about you. I was just telling somebody the other day about the opportunity to come on this podcast. I said, it's so refreshing to me to find people like you, and of course, Javon is the connection point between you and I, but who really, you're 20 plus years in the Army. That's a full career. You're retired at, by that point a lot of times, and you're still wanting to grow and you're still wanting to help other people. So back at you, brother. All the things you said about me, same to you. So yeah, as far as connecting, I would love to connect. People can find me so if they're in the Chick-fil-A world, connect with me through Leadership Consultancy. So the website is leadership-consultancy.com, or you can send me an email. It's really long, justin.dubose@leadership-consultancy.com. But if they just search my name up, they'll find me. I'm on LinkedIn and whatever. But yeah, I would love to talk to anybody because just like you, man, if you can't tell just through listening, this is really my passion. I love it, and I love helping people. And that's my sacred calling that I identified, was just how can I serve people and help launch them into greater things. So thank you for the opportunity to share that piece too, Alex.
And there you guys have it. Justin Dubose has blessed the TPE platform. We are very grateful to you coming on with us today. I'm sure if you're listening out there, you might not have enough paper left from all the notes that you took today, all the great things that Justin has brought to us. Really appreciative of him being a part of this journey with us. And until next time, TPE family, peace.
Hey guys, what's up? It's your friend, Pastor John R. Adolph from the Antioch Church in Beaumont, Texas. And I just want to slip this in right quick so you'll never forget. It's all about progress over perfection here at TPE.
Tap into the Pivot Experience, where we help young, hungry entrepreneurs move on to the next step.